Little Paul, a prominent leader of the Pawnee tribe during the 19th century, is a controversial figure in Native American history. His decision to ally with the U.S. military has sparked debates, with some viewing him as a traitor, while others see him as a pragmatic leader trying to protect his people. Little Paul's story is one of difficult choices, as he found himself caught between the pressures of hostile tribes and the expanding presence of European American settlers. The question remains, was Little Paul truly a traitor to his people, or was he a leader who acted out of necessity in a world that was rapidly changing around him? This video will explore the complex dynamics that led to his alliance with the U.S. military and how his decision affected his relationship with the Pawnee tribe and other Native American groups. By understanding his motivations, we can gain insight into the difficult decisions faced by Native American leaders in an era when survival often meant making painful compromises. Throughout the video, we will delve into the historical context of Little Paul's decision, examining the challenges his tribe faced and the ultimate consequences of his action. Join us as we uncover the legacy of a leader who, despite being branded a traitor by some, played a significant role in the survival of his people during one of the most turbulent times in Native American history. To understand Little Paul's controversial decision, it is crucial to examine the historical context of his time. The 19th century was a period of significant change for Native American tribes, particularly as the United States expanded westward. This era saw an influx of European American settlers, traders, and the U.S. military, all of whom encroached upon Native American lands, forcing tribes into increasingly difficult situations. The pressure to adapt or resist was immense, and the survival of many tribes was at stake. For the Pawnee, their traditional way of life, centered around hunting bison and agricultural practices, was under threat from both the expansion of settlers and growing conflicts with neighboring tribes. The Sioux, in particular, were a formidable enemy, with whom the Pawnee had a long-standing rivalry. Over time, the Pawnee were pushed westward, increasingly squeezed by their neighbors, and by the ever-expanding presence of settlers on their ancestral lands. This created a situation in which Little Paul and his people were increasingly vulnerable. The U.S. government, under the policies of westward expansion and manifest destiny, was determined to push Native Americans further west, forcing them onto reservations or dispersing them altogether. These policies were not only military, but also economic, with settlers claiming land in areas that native tribes had long called home. While some tribes chose to fight back against this encroachment, others, like the Pawnee under Little Paul's leadership, found themselves faced with a difficult choice of resistance or compromise. Little Paul's decision to ally with the U.S. military came against this backdrop of mounting pressure. At the time, the Pawnee were caught between the Sioux to the north and the growing influence of American settlers and soldiers to the east. The Sioux were powerful adversaries, and Little Paul recognized that the Pawnee, despite their warrior tradition, could not easily defeat the Sioux on their own. The constant threat of attack and the dwindling resources available to the Pawnee left Little Paul with few viable options. In 1864, the Pawnee, under Little Paul's leadership, made the difficult decision to support the U.S. Army in their ongoing conflicts with the Sioux. This alliance, which included providing valuable intelligence and even fighting alongside U.S. troops, was a calculated risk. Little Paul likely saw it as a way to protect his tribe by aligning with the more powerful U.S. military, hoping that the alliance would secure Pawnee territory and offer them protection from Sioux attacks. For Little Paul, the U.S. military seemed like a necessary ally in the face of the larger, more aggressive forces around. This decision was met with harsh criticism from other Native American tribes, especially those who viewed the U.S. government as an enemy and a colonial power. To them, Little Paul's actions were seen as an act of betrayal, a betrayal of his people and the broader Native American struggle against U.S. expansion. However, it is essential to understand that Little Paul's choice was made in the context of survival. He likely saw the U.S. military as a force that could help him protect his people, even if it meant aligning with an oppressor in the short term. Ultimately, Little Paul's alliance with the U.S. military is a reflection of the difficult and often morally complex decisions Native leaders had to make during this time. The Pawnee were faced with existential threats from both indigenous enemies and settlers. Choosing to side with the U.S. was, in Little Paul's view, a lesser evil, a way to safeguard the future of his people, even at the cost of betrayal in the eyes of some. His decision reflects the broader struggles faced by many Native American leaders who had to navigate the overwhelming pressures of U.S. expansion. When Little Paul chose to ally with the U.S. Army against the Sioux, his decision was seen as a betrayal by many of his own people and other Native American tribes. The Pawnee had long been a warrior society, fiercely independent and proud of their heritage. Their history, full of valor and bravery in battle, had shaped their identity. To many, Little Paul's alliance with the U.S. military was not only a political misstep, but a personal affront to the traditions and values that had guided the Pawnee for generations. For the Pawnee people, the betrayal was especially painful because it directly contradicted their long-standing struggle for survival. The Sioux were a powerful enemy, but many Pawnee believed that their greatest threat was the U.S. government's expansionist policies. The U.S. military had already forcibly removed other tribes from their lands, and the idea of working with them was abhorrent to many within the tribe. By choosing to side with the very force that had caused so much destruction to Native American communities, Little Paul was seen as abandoning the traditional resistance against American encroachment. His actions were interpreted as a personal betrayal of the Pawnee's legacy and their ongoing fight for autonomy. Many of Little Paul's critics, particularly those who viewed the U.S. government as an oppressor, felt that his alliance not only put the Pawnee people in an untenable position, but also aligned them with their enemy. The reaction within the tribe was harsh, and Little Paul faced increasing opposition from rival factions within the Pawnee. He was branded a traitor, with some questioning his loyalty to the tribe and its future. The Pawnee were divided, with some believing that cooperation with the U.S. military could bring practical benefits and ensure the tribe's survival, while others saw it as a fatal compromise that would lead to the tribe's eventual destruction. The emotional toll of this divide weighed heavily on Little Paul, who had made his decision based on the practical realities of the time. His goal had been to protect the Pawnee by making a strategic alliance with the U.S. military, but the cost of that decision was immense. He found himself isolated, no longer able to rely on the unity of his people. Despite his desire to safeguard the Pawnee's future, Little Paul's actions led to mistrust and resentment, creating a divide that lingered long after the conflict had ended. In the eyes of many, Little Paul's betrayal was not just about the political alliance with the U.S., but the perception that he had abandoned the sacred duty of a leader to protect the tribe's sovereignty. His actions were viewed as compromising the integrity of the Pawnee, and this caused deep emotional wounds within the community. As the divide grew, it became clearer that Little Paul's decision had irrevocably altered his legacy among his people. Despite the harsh criticism, there were those who still saw merit in his decision. Some believed that Little Paul had acted out of necessity, trying to find a way to ensure the survival of his people in an increasingly hostile world. His actions were seen as a reflection of the difficult choices Native American leaders had to make in the face of overwhelming external pressures. While many viewed his actions as a betrayal, others understood that Little Paul had made his decision based on the desperate circumstances of his time. However, for the majority of Pawnee, his actions would forever remain a bitter mark on their history, symbolizing the complex and often painful decisions made by leaders during an era of intense conflict and displacement. In the aftermath of Little Paul's decision to ally with the U.S. military, the Pawnee tribe faced significant consequences. The internal division created by his actions left a deep scar on the community, fracturing their sense of unity. Little Paul's decision to fight alongside the U.S. Army not only caused a rift within the tribe, but also changed the dynamics between the Pawnee and their neighbors, particularly the Sioux. While some Pawnee supported Little Paul's choice, believing it was the best option for the survival of the tribe in the face of mounting external threats, the majority viewed his alliance as a betrayal of their traditional values. For the dissenters, Little Paul's actions represented a capitulation to the very forces that had long sought to destroy Native American cultures and societies. His participation in military campaigns against the Sioux further entrenched the perception that he had sold out his people for personal gain or political advantage. The Pawnee's internal struggles deepened as rival factions formed, with those supporting Little Paul's cooperation with the U.S. military, now at odds with those who were firmly against it. This divide weakened the tribe's ability to resist outside pressures and made it more vulnerable to attacks from their traditional enemies. The Sioux, who had long been in conflict with the Pawnee, saw Little Paul's actions as a betrayal, but it also opened up new avenues for conflict between the tribes. As the years passed, the ramifications of Little Paul's decision lingered. Though the Pawnee were able to survive in the face of external pressures, the fracture caused by his actions was never fully healed. The sense of betrayal continued to haunt the tribe, and Little Paul's legacy was forever tarnished. Even though he may have believed he was protecting his people by aligning with the U.S., his actions left a mark on the Pawnee tribe that would take generations to recover from. In the end, Little Paul's decision to cooperate with the U.S. military and his subsequent betrayal of his people's trust became a tragic chapter in the history of the Pawnee. While some justified his actions as a pragmatic response to the changing realities of Native American life, the lasting division it caused among the tribe's members made it difficult to see his legacy as anything but one of deep, unresolved conflict. Today, Little Paul's story is one that serves as a reminder of the difficult choices faced by Native American leaders during the 19th century, particularly as their tribes navigated the pressures of colonization and American expansion. His legacy is both tragic and complex, as it reflects the immense challenges that indigenous leaders had to confront while trying to protect their people in a rapidly changing world. For many, Little Paul's actions are viewed as a cautionary tale about the dangers of compromising traditional values in the face of overwhelming external forces. His decision to side with the U.S. military is still seen by many as a betrayal, a choice that reflected a failure to uphold the tribe's autonomy and dignity. His actions served as a reminder of the difficult balance between survival and integrity that many Native American leaders were forced to contend with. In a time when many were faced with the loss of land, culture, and identity, Little Paul's choice to ally with the U.S. military is interpreted by some as a desperate attempt to navigate an impossible situation. On the other hand, there are those who view Little Paul's decisions as a pragmatic response to the overwhelming pressures facing the Pawnee. These individuals argue that, given the circumstances, his alliance with the U.S. Army was a strategic move to protect his people from the threat of annihilation at the hands of the Sioux and other tribes. The context of his actions must be understood within the broader framework of Native American resistance during the westward expansion of the U.S., a period marked by intense conflict and displacement. The debate surrounding Little Paul's legacy continues to this day, with his story being seen in different lights depending on one's perspective. Some view him as a pragmatic leader who made difficult decisions in a time of great crisis, while others see him as a man who betrayed his people in order to secure his own place within the new American order. What remains clear, however, is that Little Paul's actions had long-lasting effects on the Pawnee tribe and their future. His story underscores the broader struggle of Native American leaders during the era of American expansion, a time when many were forced to make decisions that would either preserve their people's survival or lead to their destruction. In the end, Little Paul's legacy serves as a poignant reminder of the moral complexities and profound sacrifices faced by indigenous peoples during one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. His actions were shaped by a world that left little room for compromise, and his legacy continues to spark debate and reflection on the difficult choices that leaders must make for the sake of their people's future. The story of Little Paul remains a contentious chapter in Native American history. His decision to collaborate with the U.S. military, particularly in their campaigns against the Sioux, continues to spark debate. Now, to some, he is seen as a pragmatic leader who made a difficult choice in the face of overwhelming external pressures. His actions are often interpreted as a means of ensuring the survival of the Pawnee during a time when Native American tribes were being displaced and decimated by American expansion. Little Paul's choice to ally with the U.S. military can be seen as a last-ditch effort to protect his people from greater destruction. However, to others, Little Paul's actions represent a betrayal of the Pawnee's traditional values and autonomy. By cooperating with the very forces responsible for the oppression of Native American peoples, he is viewed as someone who prioritized survival at the cost of his people's trust and unity. The betrayal was especially profound because it not only divided the tribe, but also weakened their ability to resist external pressure. In the end, Little Paul's legacy remains deeply divisive, a reflection of the impossible choices faced by Native leaders during a period of unprecedented cultural and territorial upheaval.